Love podcasts, hate nonsense. It's the PoliticsJOE podcast, ladies and gentlemen.
Oh, hey.
Lewis Goodall, you've swapped in for Ollie and Ava today.
We don't normally get nonces, reference to nonces in that early on the news agents.
I think if you were to do like a scientific examination on the key differences, because on paper, PoliticsJOE podcast, news agents, two men and a woman.
Yeah.
You could say that's similar. But it is, but we're the only openly anti-nonce podcast in the UK.
You should listen to our editor. He's very anti-nonce.
That's good.
Yeah, no, it is. I mean, it's good. Better than the other way around.
Quite difficult day at work.
We had a WhatsApp group called Nonce Hunters for a while.
Right.
Yeah. It's a couple of friends. Well, we just on the lookout, keeping a eye out. Bit like it was the mid-2000s, when everyone thought they were on every street, which they probably are.
It's just an offshoot of Operation U-Tree.
Yeah, exactly. It's a vigilante form of U-Tree.
It was an in-house BBC thing, and now it's gone extra house. You're keeping an eye.
Well, if you
to the ground.
Yeah, exactly.
That would be an interesting route for the news agents to take. Is becoming vigilante paedophile hunters.
Well, I mean, look at Mateless. I mean, that is a vigilante. That's a have a go hero if there were one. I'm just waiting to happen.
I was concerned we would drag you down to our level.
I dragged myself down. It took, what was that, about 45 seconds there before we got there.
I think there will be a lot of PoliticsJOE podcast fans who also listen to the news agents, and this would be like, there were comments like, the crossover I never thought would happen, even though I interviewed John Sopel very recently.
And everyone's into you, John Sopel.
You're harder to pin
well,
down.
I mean, that man, seriously. Is there anywhere he won't flog that book?
No, well, speaking of.
Oh, Jesus. Get his face away from me. Get away from me. I can't bear it. I've got to go see him later.
I would be staggered if the audience did not know who you were. But how would you like to introduce...
Joke.
How would you introduce yourself?
So I'm a presenter on the news agents when I'm not doing the vigilantism, and I'm used to work at the BBC as Newsnight and Sky News, and just general kind of ponderer.
Ponderer?
But yeah, just general
Man
ponderer. Confused.
Flaneur?
I love that.
Yeah.
I used to work with a director who called himself a flaneur.
Really?
Yeah, we made a film in Paris, and he was like, "This is where we get to be a flaneurs together."
Is flaneur just a man who walks around in nice clothes? Is that what?
Well, here we are.
And I'm
he was very influential on
me. Is there a reason for the velvet today? You look very smart.
There's never not a good reason to wear velvet. It's good enough for the 12th Doctor and Peter Capaldi. It's kind of good enough for me. I'm sure there are a few Doctor Who fans who listen to this podcast. I would imagine the Venn diagram is pretty bloody shady.
I would hate to bet there are at least several.
It's our Christmas party later tonight, so I've dressed up for the occasion. Am I the first man to wear velvet in the PoliticsJOE studio?
I think you almost definitely are. I'm trying to think.
I'm trying to bring up the standards.
No, definitely, and we need it, because there has been some very impressive people. I'm not sure, like, Zizek wears velvet very often.
No, not with all that spit.
No,
we get all over it. It'll be impossible to clean out.
Maybe that'll be my 2025.
Yeah. Hey, it's in. So
sure
they tell me. Can't you tell?
We're here to kind of examine, to look back on some political themes of 2024.
Yes.
We've got some clips lined up to react to. But before we get into that, there's obviously so much to choose from, and it's quite difficult to kind of narrow down themes and incidents. But is there anything that's particularly stood out for you this year, an image or a moment in British politics?
Well, I think that it's like it's sort of hard to get out the thing that's most recently in your brain, right? Because that's just kind of what journalism is, and we have the sort of attention of a gadfly. But I mean, it's hard to, and maybe it's not really an image of 2024. It's probably more a kind of a little precursor to 2025, or a little sort of glimpse of the future. But I can't get that image of Farage and Musk out of my head.
Yeah.
With the onlooking Trump in the weird cricket jumper. I didn't know he used to play down the Oval.
No, I didn't know they had cricket in
New York City. Very odd. Sort of Trump sort of looking down from on high, like a kind of demented Ian Botham, just kind of looking down. And, you could just, one thing is, I think one of the things about 2024 that journalism has yet to recalibrate to is the fact that Keir Starmer, Labour, have got an unassailable parliamentary majority. Mm-hmm. Right? That is just like it's just a pillar of stability that has literally not been there, arguably since either the coalition, because they had an majority, or even before that, the sort of last Blair government. And so what it means is that like we're still operating on the kind of looking through the kind of Tory chaos lens. Like every time there's a kind of a minor incident, half of journalism jumps up and like Twitter jumps up and going like, this is it for Keir Starmer. This is it. It's like, no, this is not it. It's never going to be it, right? Because not only is the Labour Party basically useless at fratricide, it never ever kills it. It's or regicide, never kills its leaders. But also because like it's unassailable. It's just there, right? And so it's kind of like it means that we haven't kind of shifted, but it does mean, and it means that we haven't shifted into thinking that the thing that Keir Starmer has got on his side most is time. Mm-hmm. He's just got time. Like everything that seems massive now, in a way that Richie Sunak never had. The one thing he didn't have was time. The one thing that Liz Truss, as we know, most definitely did not have was time.
She maybe thought she had more time than she did.
Yeah, but they did not have time. You know, the politics of 2029 is unviewable and unknowable. Mm-hmm. And all of these crises that look big now, or the things we're worrying about now, we'll barely even think about. But what we can see pretty clearly, I think, is the politics of 2025. And the politics of 2025 is like Farage is going to be like throwing and lobbing hand grenades here, there, and everywhere, which is going to destabilise Starmer. Starmer's got to, in order to get to 2029, he's got to find a way through that and find a way through the fact that Farage is going to be a louder and louder voice in our politics, whether or not he gets the money. And I've been going on about this for the last 2 weeks now. Like, Labour need to wake up. Like, Starmer and the government, I'm amazed by the lack of urgency about this Musk money. They should be changing the law like yesterday. Mm-hmm. They've got a manifesto. It wouldn't actually, and people go, oh, you can't change the rules, there's no mandate. They've got a mandate to do it. They literally had in their manifesto that they wanted to change electoral law to make sure that there wasn't foreign interference, all this. Musk is a foreign interference waiting to happen in our election. We have never had big money in our elections. But right now, right, we have got, this is my hobby horse, you can tell, right? I hope you like this on PoliticsJOE, right? But no, but like we have got, and everyone watching this will know this, we have said for years, we've very haughtily said to ourselves, we look at like those American attack ads and go, oh, we don't have anything like that. British politics is much more patrician. Well, you're living on another planet, right? Because it's true that the ridiculous thing is, on TV and radio, like when I was at Newsnight, if I went to a by-election and I interviewed like the Lib Dems, or I interviewed, say it was a two-way race between the Tories and Labour, law meant that I had to interview every no-hope bloody candidate going, just to give them 20 seconds, which made the package completely unwatchable, unwieldy, boring as hell, right? And then you just have to basically cycle through them. And then the Green candidate thinks it, whatever. Just because our law seems to suggest that if I didn't include every single candidate, it might sway the election. Meanwhile, is there a single rule on anything anyone does online with regard to political advertising? Basically not. And that is just... And you combine that with the fact that that law is just waiting to be exploited in terms of loads of foreign money coming in, with a Wild West online universe, which no British politician has had the guts to try and tackle. It is a catastrophe waiting to happen. And once the genie's out the bottle, it'll never go back in.
I think as well, you talk about political advertising, there was a social media post Labour did last year. I can't remember the exact phrasing, but it was like, Rishi Sunak voted against
letting rapists out of jail, something like that.
Yes, something like he's in favour of this.
He's in favour of rape, basically. Yes, he was in favour of rapists. It was basically.
It was an astonishing thing to assert, and it could not be done on television. No. It could not be done on radio because it was an Instagram post. Yeah. Absolutely fair game.
That's what I mean. And to be fair, if you talk, I remember. I mean, again, it seems ages ago now, but I remember interviewing Steve Reed, the cabinet minister who was kind of behind that at the time, or very close to it. And they would say, look, the Tories are going to do this to us. It's going to be dirty. We're going to get ahead of it. And that's true in a sense. That is the arms race. But then imagine $100 million worth of money injected into that. And, before you know where you are, at a stroke, right? At a stroke, you're basically at the kind of levels of toxicity that you see in America. And, people are saying at the moment, and people, Labour are such bedwetters often. They'll say things like, or Labour people will say, oh, well, but then we'll be seen to have changed, the rules and people will say that's unfair.
No one's playing that game anymore.
No one's playing. Don't worry about that.
Yeah.
Do you think that Farage or whoever it is would worry about that, or Trump would worry about that? And maybe you take some flack and people would attack you for changing the rules or whatever, despite the fact, as I say, you've got a mandate. But you know what's worse? $100 million. Yeah. And you know what? Maybe not just $100 million, maybe $200 million or $300 million. And an entire online space which is suddenly weaponized against you, particularly for younger voters who, by the way, are actually quite like Farage, quite like reform, just as like some younger voters would quite like Trump. Not least because actually, like if you think about it, if you were like, 10 in 2016, So that's, going on, and you're a voting age now. Brexit seems very, very distant to you.
Yeah.
All that stuff is very distant to you. It's like Trump's first election is very distant. This is your normal. You've grown up in this political environment. And the Liberals, the classic Lib argument has been, this is not normal, these people aren't normal. It's like, guess what? You're the ones who are starting to seem not normal. Yeah. You're the ones who are starting to sound like you're from another age. Because these are the people who've defined the mores of our age, right? And so they need to, but as ever, there's never any sense of urgency. They're always worried about looking political.
We've got a clip, actually. It's clip 3, JP. We said we were going to play jazz in this interview. There was a loose structure.
Duke Wellington.
While we're on Farage, we might as well.
Well, it's pretty horrendous. A third young girl has died as a result of the stabbings yesterday in Southport. I obviously join everybody in my horror at what has happened. I know the Prime Minister went to lay flowers and was heckled, and it shows you how unhappy the public are with the state of law and order in our country. I have to say there are one or two questions. Was this guy being monitored by the security services? Some reports say he was, others less sure. The police say it's a non-terror incident, just as they said the stabbing of an Army Lieutenant Colonel in uniform on the streets of Kent the other day was a non-terror incident. I just wonder whether the truth is being withheld from us. I don't know the answer to that, but I think it is a fair and legitimate question. What I do know is something is going horribly wrong in our once beautiful country.
So I think that's
classic Farage.
Classic Farage, but it's also a perfect example of what you're talking about, in that Farage posted that clip directly to Twitter. There's no interviewer. He's bypassed the political media entirely. I think because I'm I suppose a political journalist, but I'm not in the lobby. I'm not kind of in that sphere. I thank my lucky stars every day. Yeah. But I think there is a sense of entitlement, a worthiness, and anger when people bypass kind of the lobby mechanics of political journalism. He's shown politicians don't need them anymore. They don't need to go on a pool clip. They can just speak directly to an audience, and so serious distrust in British institutions.
And that was classic Farage, because Farage is great at, and I don't, in a way, you can't knock him for it, because he does show a level of political skill which, many of his opponents simply do not exhibit. He's very good at kind of knowing where the line is, getting right up to it, standing on top of it, jumping on top of it a couple of times, shaking it, and maybe just putting a tiny toe over it. And then going, if someone says, wait, you went over the line. So I was nowhere over the line. No. I wasn't over the line. It's like they're saying, look, are there questions about this? Are things being hidden from us? I'm not saying they are. I'm just asking questions, And it's a really good example of how he changes and shapes the conversation. And you're right. Look, I don't begrudge in a way politicians taking their message directly to voters. That's tech. And you're right. Journalists, particularly journalists, sort of traditional political journalists, can get very, very pearl clutchy about it. No one owes us a living. No one owes us interviews. No one owes us anything. I mean, I would like to think that politicians who have got investment in the political system, ought to do things and ought to do interviews when they don't want to, out of a sense of sort of democratic attachment and democratic, and a sense that they ought to do these things. But again, it's quite an old-fashioned view these days. But what I do think is that politicians need to grasp with reality, the reality of the media environment that we live in. I mean, for example, we both do pretty successful podcast shows, right? On what, if you think, and maybe you don't think this, someone like Farage wouldn't think this, he would probably think that all media should be unregulated, that's fair enough. But if you're a politician who thinks that it's important that the airwaves are regulated, that big media providers have to have any sort of some sense of due impartiality, it doesn't mean that you have to be like the BBC and do it in the way that they do it, in an incredibly kind of slightly stolid way, but that you do have some requirements in terms of what you can and can't put out, which goes beyond just the law. If you think that's important, why on earth does it matter how that media is delivered? Mm-hmm. Whether it's on television, or whether it's on radio, or whether it's on, as we're now on, a podcast, or on YouTube, just because the screen's in your pocket, why does it mean that there needs to be, rather than on a television, on your TV stand, why does it mean that what goes on the TV stand or on your television is subject to completely different requirements than the thing on your phone. It doesn't make any logical or philosophical sense, and yet, no politician has been willing to grapple with it. It is hard, I get it, in terms of regulation, and it's hard about, you want to over-regulate things like podcasts and regulate them to death. I wouldn't want to see that either. But it is a discrepancy which is going to become more and more gaping. The more this sort of media, the bigger it gets, and it's already massive, versus, frankly, traditional dying media.
I wonder if it's a generational thing, in that the people in charge, like Keir Starmer is a man in his 60s.
I agree with this.
Which I think people forget because he looks far younger. But people are kind of our age are the first generation to kind of grown up with the internet. If you think, like, if parents knew what people of my generation were doing online, they couldn't even fathom like things like chat roulette. There's parents who are like, they
got
did
no
not know.
Idea.
Absolutely no idea.
I don't really have an idea. If you're of about 6, even generationally below, like someone who's 16, I don't really have much of an idea.
Absolutely no idea. So
I think this is spot on.
The internet accelerates at such a pace. It's the genie's out of the bottle, and also expanded to 1 million genies, and they're expanding, and you're just trying to catch that genie still.
I think that's spot on. I don't think that. I think half of because the thing is as well, broadcast media in particular, and the media generally, it is quite a sort of stolid industry, in the sense that actually the same people tend to dominate it for very long periods of time. Yeah. It's not easy, actually, as many people who've tried to break into the media know, it's not easy to advance very quickly. So it's always quite an interesting thing. If you're an absolute sad weirdo like me and watch loads of election nights on YouTube kind of repeatedly, then it's a hobby. It's cheap.
We all need one.
It's actually really striking when you look at the people who are doing kind of like a lot of the broadcast work, the broadcast journalists in, say, 92 or 97 or 2001 or whatever it happens to be. They're basically a lot of the same people who are still there. The politicians, by contrast, are usually completely different, apart from a few old-timers who stick around forever. But the rate of turnover in journalism is very, very slow. And so I think one of the reasons that a lot of traditional broadcasters and a lot of traditional newspapers or whatever have been slow and lost market share to a lot of insurgents in the digital space is simply because, even though they do sometimes bring people on to try and, think innovatively, a lot of the people, particularly at a management level, who dominate these things just do not get it. They're the same people year after year after year. They are quite, as I say, quite kind of quiescent kind of industries in some ways. And I think that is a problem. I think that's a problem. I mean, one thing that I'm always really struck by, I was talking to a journalist colleague of mine not long ago, quite a senior journalist on a newspaper, and she was saying that she's got Downing Street on the phone to her all the time. And I was thinking a number of times about saying, why have you written in this copy, and why have you done this, whatever, which is very normal. And I was just sort of started thinking about it, and I started thinking, I almost never have Downing Street on the phone to me in that way. And that's fine with me. That's absolutely. I mean, I talk to them usually. I'll initiate a conversation, ask them something, but I haven't got their sort of top comms people on the phone to me saying, "I saw this clip. Why you said that?" And I don't expect them to be listening to our show all the time. But it did make me think. I do think there is, and again, I think Downing Street press operation is representative of this. I am astonished the asymmetry of importance. Yeah. They attach to traditional media still, the papers, which matter, of course they matter, and broadcast. But I don't think there's any real sense in Downing Street anyway, of the importance of the new media world. And if they do understand it, they're in no way trying to or putting the emphasis or the energy into trying to get their message out there. Frankly, you or I, on our shows, if we do a clip or, that travels or, we reach way more people than an article on whatever newspaper it is. Yep. Way more. But do we have that kind of sense of engagement from Downing Street? No, we don't. And I think I think that's something they're going to need to change. Learn from what happened with the Democrats in the election. Exactly the same thing. Trump got it. The Republicans got it. Democrats didn't.
I think Farage is probably the person who is exploiting that, the new media, the best.
Farage gets it.
He gets it entirely. I wonder, do you think reform is the inevitable vehicle to challenge kind of the orthodoxy? And what I mean by that is there's a sense of kind of general frustration with mainstream politics in Britain, and I think right now reform are the current vector for that. But we've saw in the general election independents won in seats that they were unlikely to. You've kind of seen in Scotland the support for the SNP for the past 17 years. In Wales, you've got Plaid. Do you think reform is the inevitable beneficiary of this, or do you think it could be harnessed by something else?
I think it could be harnessed by something else, for sure. And I think the big question for me going forward is horrible phrase in the future is forward to what? I think in the future is what is Farage's and Reform's ceiling, and because they've always had one. Farage has obviously been knocking around for a long time. He's probably now, really, easily the kind of sort of longest. He's gone in and out, obviously, but he's been on the scene as a national political figure for longer than any of the others. And he's always, obviously, it's cliche, but is this sort of Marmite kind of character, right? He does attract, and he's compelling, but he also repels at the same time. Lots and lots of voters. That's why they didn't want him running the 16 Brexit referendum campaign. I think the question is whether he can increase that ceiling and whether circumstances have done so, or whether he is still someone who can be caricatured. There are real political weaknesses for him. If I were Labour, I would basically be hammering him endlessly on basically the mismatch, and his greatest political weakness is the mismatch between the sorts of voters to whom he is sort of going after, or to whom on paper he should be most attractive. Older, more socially conservative, more authoritarian voters. But there is a mismatch between them and Farage, not on cultural issues, where they are aligned, and immigration and so on, but on economic issues. They are misaligned. Farage, he's basically an old-school Tory libertarian in all sorts of ways. He's quite open, as said many times. He doesn't really think the NHS is the best model. He was extremely, it was exposed perhaps most explicitly during COVID, when basically most of those voters, they'd still have us in lockdown now. If you look at polling, I'm not even joking, there's a good big proportion of those voters who still want to bring back the rule of 6. Seriously, it's not. And of course, when you point out to them, it's like, you can do that now. You can impose lockdown on yourself. But it's not that they don't just want lockdown for themselves. They want it for everyone. Right? Yeah. But there is this kind of they want to ban things like tobacco again, all that sort of thing. They want to ban things. They're quite sort of doctrinaire in these ways. That's not Farage. So on tax, on the NHS, on the role of the state generally, Labour is still much more aligned to these voters on those matters than Farage is. But Labour have got to be much better at kind of exposing that, of showing that, and prizing them away from Farage. So he's got political weaknesses. His greatest strength is that if you're thinking about where else could be a kind of receptacle, a vessel of that discontent, the thing about Farage is that he always has his act together. He often alienates people around him, but he has a group of people around him who are very loyal. They've got a party apparatus. They've got a machine. They've got more and more money. I suppose the obvious question is, could there be a vessel of that or vision of that on the left? So there's all been this talk about a sort of Corbynite kind of way. But again, Corbyn, I don't think he's interested in doing it, but even if he were, he don't have his act together, right? He never did. That was one part of the problem. It's not clear. There isn't there's not a party apparatus. There's not an obvious other party where that could go. I'm surprised the Greens aren't doing a bit better.
Yep.
And they would say, and I've had this conversation with them, they would say that's because of you, the media. You're focusing so much on reform rather than Greens. You know what I would say to that, to the Greens? Be better.
Do something interesting.
Do something interesting.
Stop opposing pylons.
Yeah.
Stop opposing renewable energy.
And I was actually talking to someone from Reform about this the other day, and I put this question to them. I said, what would you say to someone like that, a Green, who says to me, or someone from the media, why are you obsessing? And people will be saying this now when we're talking about reform. They say, why are you obsessing with them in the media? And he'd say, and he said, we're just better than them. It's not necessarily that there are more people who would support them than the Greens. What they are is they're savvier. They always turn up. Yep. They know how to get attention. Look at Farage this last couple of weeks when he's been talking. He manages to get himself into every single story. Look at the thing about the Chinese spy.
Yeah.
Who's going to name him in Parliament? Nigel Farage. It's all of that. Whereas the Greens, again, they're still playing by the old game. Wow. Still playing by the old rules.
They're too nice.
Trying to be grown up. Trying to be too nice. Get out there. Make noise. You've got to in this day and age. It's not wrong. I know it might feel a bit dirty or you might feel a bit immature, but in this age of content, an age of constant noise, that's what you've got to do. do something interesting. And then, there could be another vessel for it.
Because I suppose the Greens are quite a unique party in that, they've got co-leaders, for instance, but I wonder if that...
Yeah, well, that's a problem.
Yeah. No,
that's ridiculous.
It is. It's for HR reasons of job sharing is the argument that they give. And I think also it's the case of the left eats itself. You need to be purer than pure within that the people who are on the left in the activist base sort of thing, they are so holier than thou. If you are not purer than pure, we're going to eat you. We're going to defenestrate you entirely. And they have to cater to that base first.
There's a thing on the left about everyone must have prizes, all must have prizes. That everyone has to be. There's a thing always on the left that the whole of the coalition has to be managed, because if you do something and one part of the coalition isn't happy about it, that's bad, and they'll sound off. Mm-hmm. That's a problem. Mm-hmm. It's not good. I don't like it, but the fact is, Reform is a one-man band. Effectively, he's got other people around it, and that is a weakness in some senses. And it's very telling that whenever Farage goes off the stage, Reform don't do as well. A lot of it is about him. But it does mean that, autocracy does have its advantages, as we can see, and they don't care. They'll just do stuff. They'll act quickly. They'll break things and they'll act quickly. Mm. And that in the media environment works. But yeah, I think that, I think the danger, if you're on the sort of mainstream of British politics, if you're on the centre left, centre right, if you think the old duopoly kind of works, it is very telling, and this is the other talk about trends of 2024, that percentage of the vote that the Conservatives and Labour right now are commanding in the polls is so low. I mean, it's barely 50%. This is historically really, really unusual. I mean, if you go back to the 2017 election, Labour and the Tories between them got 84% of the vote. Now, that was a bit unusual. I mean, that is a bit of an aberration from the recent trend of the last 30 or 40 years or so, which has seen greater fragmentation, and that was about Brexit and so on. Both parties kind of basically become the de facto Leave-Remain parties. But even so, in that time, we saw it in the general election of this year. I mean, again, Labour barely got 34% of the vote. Tories got 22% of the vote. This is historically, this is massive, right? And if that continues, and you can imagine a world, and I've said before, classic contradiction of journalists saying you can't see what 2029 is like, but you can see a world, might not be the world, but you can see a world in 2028, 29, where basically all of the orthodox parties, for want of a better phrase, are seen to have failed so badly that, Labour has failed in office, the Conservatives haven't redeemed themselves from what happened in the previous period of government, the Lib Dems have a kind of ceiling, and even then there's a sort of residual coalition thing. And so then suddenly there is this appetite and yearning for something different and something new, because all of the other parties are in some way delegitimized. There is so much, I can't describe, I thought this during the election, when you go around, the level of cynicism out there is astounding. It's
They're
caustic.
All the same.
It's caustic. And I've been a political journalist for 12 years or so, and and I'm sure it was bad then, and I've got colleagues who've been in it a lot longer who've always said it's not like people have ever loved politics, but it does feel something qualitatively different about it now somehow. It feels on another level. It's not just, I think I've seen it even in my career go from, I don't like that politician. I think that politician is a liar. Or even I think all politicians are a liar, to something more fundamental, which is the system doesn't work.
Yep.
It's rigged.
It's toxic.
It's corrupt.
Yep.
It's toxic. And they're all part of it, which is different from just saying you don't like certain politicians or certain parties.
No, absolutely. For old time's sake, shall we have a clip of Richie Sunak?
Oh, lovely. Let's do it.
Clip one, JP, please.
Gosh, hello.
Good to see you.
Very nice to see you. Hey, sorry to
I'm
have
well,
kept
thank
you.
you. No, not at all. I know you've been in Normandy.
Yeah, it all just ran over. It was
course.
incredible, but it just ran over everything.
I'm sure it was
so apologies for keeping you.
No, not at all. I'm sure it was a powerful trip. I mean, so pertinent as well this year, considering what's happened in the Ukraine.
Yeah, which I haven't seen President Biden's remarks, but I think that's kind of the echo, I think, what he said.
Did you get to meet any of the veterans, or were you...
Oh, no,
did you
gosh,
just
lots.
have to do the ceremonial?
Lots. Over yesterday and
Okay,
today.
Yeah,
I've already spoke to almost everyone that was there.
It's incredible, he says, like he's been to Crufts or something.
Ah, beautiful veterans. Beautiful, darling
Beautiful
veterans. Doing tricks. So that's Richie Sunak apologising to Paul Brand that the D-Day commemorations dragged on a little bit. Sorry for holding up this interview. They didn't go out live that day. I think it went out the week later.
Yes, it'd be like that, yeah.
What do you think we can learn from that clip about Richie Sunak, his premiership, his political instincts?
Well, I don't think we need the clip to learn much about his political instincts, do we? We have
But a handy visual guide.
We have the worst election result in Conservative history.
Yep.
I mean, I don't even think they've internalised that enough. I think it's. I went. Did you go to the Tory Party conference?
I'm not allowed in.
You're not allowed in.
I stand
outside. What have you done?
We don't need to go into that.
Oh, that's good.
Believe it or not, the Conservative Party doesn't love politics, Joe.
No.
So I stand outside.
But they're all about free speech.
That's what we say.
They love free speech.
So we have a tradition of I vox pop Conservative Party members. Jacob Rees-Mogg walks in.
Right.
I doorstep Jacob Rees-Mogg. It's a whole thing. It's kind of it's a tradition. It's
Right.
actually always around my birthday time as well. So it's a nice treat.
Good. Well, anyway, I went. They did let me in, and it was that was nice. It was such a weird thing. They were so bloody happy.
They were
jubilant.
Yes, they were like, oh, it's going to be
They
4
were
years
loving
of
it.
opposition.
It was extraordinary. I couldn't believe it. They were quaffing back the champagne. They were smiling, and all because like Keir Starmer had I don't know, like had a slightly difficult time in government.
Yep.
Well, he was never going to be amazing, was it? Like not least with given how they left it.
Yeah.
I mean, it was absolutely it was astounding, really. And I think it's because I don't think they've quite engaged with the level of the hole that they're in. I mean, honestly, like the Conservative Party had never got less than 30% of the vote before this year.
Yep.
And now they're on 21, 22% of the vote. They've got 120 MPs. They never had fewer than 169 MPs before. I mean, it's so bad. I mean, like you look at the map. You look at the map sometimes. And you're like, what? They don't have Aldershot. What?
Yep.
What? What's happened there? Like they don't have Bury St Edmunds is a Labour seat. The People's Republic of Bury St Edmunds. I mean, it's absolutely mad. I'm still sort of doing that. Again, I spend many an evening over the constituency map. Something to look forward to over the new year.
Definitely.
But yeah, I mean, look, he was. I mean, in some ways, I don't think there was a great deal that could have been done for him.
No.
It was fag end.
He was just holding. He was the one holding the ball if they were getting tackled.
I mean, he could have still been Prime Minister now. We could have had a general election in January, in 30th of January.
Whoa.
I know.
That's an astonishing thought, isn't it?
I know.
That's a good counterfactual.
Last time we had a general election in January. Bit of trivia for the PoliticsJOE listeners.
Well, they will know that I'm a scholar of a general election, so I know a January. I've got no idea. I didn't know. Sorry.
1910.
1910.
In fact, in 1910 we had two. One in January, one in December. Lucky voters, huh?
What a treat.
Yeah, what a treat. And you know what? There's only a difference of 2 seats. After all that. Yeah, only
What
2
was the
seats.
point?
There was none.
That's astonishing.
Voters were like, you know what? We got it right last time.
That's absolutely incredible.
I know.
I suffered a bit from voter fatigue between about 2014 and probably up to about 2019 because I went Scottish independence referendum,
of course,
Scottish elections, general elections, county election. I think I voted like between the age of 17 actually, and 23.
The most sophisticated form of sort of Japanese war torture.
Just voting all the time.
Voting year after year after year.
I'm not sure I won one as well,
No.
which was slightly disheartening.
I think if our generation has learned anything, it's not to expect to win elections.
No, it's just here's my cross that means nothing, and here we are.
It's just a psychological form of abuse. Democracy is just abuse for us.
Do you think Kemi is the right person to lead back the Conservative Party? What have you made of her start to being His Majesty's Leader of the Opposition?
You know what? The thing is that I've watched her sometimes. I've sometimes been quite impressed by her, in a sense that at least she says something. I mean, sometimes what she says. I mean, I know that's a low bar. I mean, sometimes what she says is mental.
Yeah.
But absolutely. It's arresting.
God, it's compelling.
I mean, it's compelling. I mean, the woman manages to have a fight with a ham sandwich.
Yeah.
I mean, that is too moist. No politicians ever say the word moist.
No, or just talk about steak.
Or talk about. I like the thought someone said she just summons it.
Oh,
time for the steak.
Shall I call you out on your lunch opinion?
Oh, go on, yeah.
You tweeted that no breakfast is bad. Is that?
No, I love breakfast.
You love breakfast, hate lunch.
Hate lunch. I'm like the king. Me, king, and Kemi. What a trio!
Just dress in velvet out for
yeah.
Or a
little
crown.
No. I just think that I like lunch if you're gonna have a proper lunch.
Right,
To be fair, if someone's bringing me a steak every day, fantastic. But unfortunately, I don't have Kemi's minions who are bringing me a filet mignon. She. So I don't like, but so I think most of the lunch options you have, if you're working, are awful. I like a lunch break.
Yep.
I had a load of people when I said that going like, you want everyone to work all day. It's like, calm down, everybody, calm down.
No.
It's all right. No, I just think that I just think there's only so many sort of Pret smoked salmon rolls one can have.
Where you work though is pretty appalling. Where you're going to go to Angus Steakhouse. Well, you could actually. That'd be great.
Me and Kemi are there every day.
Yeah.
It's perfect. Me and Kemi are there. Another one. Raw, please. Only raw steak for me and Kemi. No, look, she does say so. I thought at least sometimes she has an analysis. Right, I think she got of what's gone wrong with politics. I don't necessarily think it's all correct, but she at least has a sort of conceptual framework. I think she's got two big problems. One is that that analysis and conceptual framework, whilst interesting to like a nerd like me who thinks about politics all the time, I think has almost no purchase whatsoever with anybody else or like with a voter, because her analysis, her framework for what's gone wrong in politics is actually quite an academic one in some ways. It's basically that, the state has been captured by kind of quite left-wing forces. The regulatory state is sort of heavily burdensome. The legal architecture that we've inherited from New Labour, which we never tackled, has sort of forced the state to do things in all sorts of taken the state in all sorts of unconservative directions. You see what I mean? I'm boring myself, even as I'm explaining it. I'm boring myself, and then you try and explain that. You take that on the doorstep.
Put that on a slogan.
Exactly. Take that on the doorstep to a wet Thursday in Aldershot, and see where you get to. Right. So it's sort of interesting in a kind of somewhat philosophical academic way, but how that translates, and indeed she hasn't, it's very, very early days, she hasn't been able to find any way of translating it. She's actually been weirdly quiet. I think her second problem is this. I think that she, and this is I think a broader problem for the for the right generally, I think she's terminally online.
Yeah.
100%. She's such an online politician.
She's like, it's like hearing Kemi speak is like hearing Matt Goodwin speak.
Yeah, completely.
You can see, you can trace the thought.
100%. It's the kind of spectator, kind of Goodwin, kind of all right. That kind of sort of axis of kind of like. And what makes me laugh about that, or sort of makes me smile about that, is that these are the people who are telling the liberal left that they're kind of like in a bubble.
Yeah.
I mean, honestly, in an ecosystem, they are in an ecosystem which is basically hermetically sealed. I mean, I always think this about, they go on about the liberal metropolitan elite. Yeah, there is such a thing as a liberal metropolitan elite in a way, but at least they know it. At least they know it, and they feel guilty about it. They know. That's the thing. The liberal left at least know that they don't represent that many people, and they feel awful about it. The illiberal right, i.e. those people, they think they represent someone. They don't represent anybody.
No.
The liberal left at least have got some self-awareness. Like they don't represent. They know very often they're in a bit of a bubble, and they don't feel that great about it, or they feel some guilt about it. They are in the biggest bubble going. She is terminally online, as you say. Like everything she says and all the stuff she comes out with, it's just a sort of spiked kind of universe, all that sort of stuff that's just there. And it leads her down like very odd places and like starts to get into very odd rebukes. It's like when, a good example of it is, a few weeks ago when that bloody petition calling for a general election. Was people went on about that for about a day, as if it showed anything. I mean, it turns out half the respondents are in Belize, and like. But if you were to go on Twitter or X or any of the sort of online right spaces, you would think that the country... Starmer's finished. You would think the country was basically crying out that they were going to take to the streets of Darlington, demanding a general election. And now, I think any leader of the opposition who had a little bit more political savvy and was not so online would recognise that for what it was. She mentions it in the House of Commons. And she actually calls on him to resign. Like, as leader of the opposition... As leader of the opposition, right, you want to keep that in your back pocket, like for a really bad moment. When, Starmer didn't call for Johnson to resign until like really towards the absolute nadir of Partygate. That's a powerful card, resign, because you can only say it once. Can't say it every word, you can, but then it kind of does lose its force somewhat, right?
The waspy woman, resign.
Yeah, exactly. So, Margaret Thatcher portrait, resign. That's another good one, the Margaret Thatcher portrait, like that.
Why on earth would he have that up?
Well, I don't know. I can understand the eyes following around. Although Starmer's responses are funny. He's like, I don't like any portrait. I don't like anyone. I don't like any portraits on the wall.
Look, I'm a landscape man.
I didn't see Starmer coming out against portraiture and portrait artists.
Then also Starmer's a weird guy. I think that's weird.
Yeah, but you know what he does? Apparently, I've never heard him do it, but it was in that amazing Guardian profile of him before the election. And I did ask someone, and they did say it was occasionally true. And I think he should do this more. Apparently, sometimes he refers to himself in the third person.
Talks about Keir.
So he goes he says, that was a bad day for Keir Starmer. But I think he should do that more. Either,
weird.
Keir Starmer doesn't like this. He should. Yes, I think that
Like
he should
the Donald or
lean into the
something.
kind of like, basically, if he had like if he had a sort of online personality, it would be kind of like, bit weird centrist dad, right? And that is like quite weird centrist dad behaviour.
That was a bad day for Keir Starmer.
Bad day for Keir
That is
Starmer.
so funny.
So
I
funny.
really hope he does that.
That's so funny. And he would never expect it. It would be so good.
Speaking of, he's had probably one very good day this year, one extremely good day.
Very good.
Some worse days.
And he went to Taylor Swift.
yeah.
Twice.
When
Twice.
When Arsenal won the North London derby.
Yeah.
Shall we have another clip of
Oh, yeah, let's go on
Starmer?
then.
I think it's number 2, JP.
Oh.
Well, on the clothes, I mean, look, in the general election campaign, we're busy and lots of people want to help. And in this particular instance, said, well, I can help with sorting out some clothes. In opposition, that's one thing. What I would say now is I won't be doing donations for clothes again. There won't be any declarations like that. But look, I think that's a matter of judgment for individuals. And Beth, I might just gently say, Sky invite us to quite a lot of hospitality events. Your summer party is a great party costing thousands of pounds, and you invite me every year. Presumably you want politicians to continue to come.
I love that.
Yeah.
I love that. I wish we could see more of that Starmer.
It's a good line, isn't it?
Well, I was amazed. I mean, to be honest, I thought all those stories were such bollocks.
Mm-hmm.
I understand why, but it's not criticism of Beth, by the way, who I like and admire enormously, and I think was completely, she had to ask about it in those circumstances. But the whole overall tenor of the story, in the main, there were a few little things here and there that were perhaps ill-advised. But in the main, it was bollocks.
That's what is it? Duncan Robinson, the economist, talked about it's the journalism of noticing.
Yeah, exactly. Like suddenly, every now and again, about 6 months, every 6 months, 12 months or so, there's this sort of frenzy when it's like journalists discover the register of members' interests, which is literally there the entire time. It's not Woodward and Bernstein. No one's bloody discovered.
Breaking in.
No one's discovered anything.
No.
No one's. It's just, and it's a really good example. The whole thing was a really good example of the power of and how much of politics is about narrative. Mm-hmm. It's just about, particularly political journalism, moving as a pack, discovering for a brief period. We're not talking about it now, which perhaps indicates that it wasn't the most important thing in the world. In the same way that we're still talking about, obviously, like Ukraine 3 years on, or actual events.
Yep.
We're still talking about, or real journalism. This was just nonsense. I mean, I was actually amazed, to be honest, that more journalists were not more circumspect about both asking politicians about it and being asked themselves about
what do you
freebies they might receive. Journalism is not an industry which is without the occasional bit of corporate hospitality.
No, definitely.
And the difference with politicians is we don't have to disclose it to anybody.
No.
And I was amazed that more, if I'd been a politician, I would have turned around to anybody who'd asking me about it saying, have you ever received any corporate hospitality? And if they said yes, and I said, so do you believe, and I'd say, by the way, I think that's completely fine, but I assume you believe that you can continue to do your job without being influenced by that hospitality. Yes?
Yep.
And they'd have to say yes. Well, so can I.
Yeah.
Because it's exactly the same thing.
It was also, I think it was maybe, some of it was slightly strange in that, why did Mrs. Starmer need clothes bought by Lord Ali? Things like there's certain foibles in it I think people were picking up on.
I understand that, and I can understand why people, and look, I think it did, did do them real political damage.
Yeah,
and I
definitely.
think it was unfair, and people, and I can totally understand why people would find it peculiar. I mean, the only thing I'd say is that, again, and it was about the communication, how it was conveyed. I mean, it is not unusual. When I worked at Sky News, I did Sky News election night this year. They bought me a suit for it. Like to wear. And it's not when I worked for Sky News when I first started to work there. They'd buy a few suits for you because they want you to look good.
Yeah.
That is their employer. I think that the mistake is that it should have been the Labour Party buying it for them.
Rather than Lord Ali.
I think you take the donor away,
right,
and it would have been the Labour Party buying it for them. Because I do not think it's unreasonable in the middle of an election campaign, particularly, I know people say, well, it's the Prime Minister's wife or whatever, but she'll get it in the net completely. If she looks awful or she's not wearing nice clothes, the Telegraph and the Mail and all those that hammered them would have been the first ones going, oh, she's not looking nice, she's not taking it seriously, all of this sort of stuff. So you really can't win with this stuff. And, it became frenzied beyond belief when they were going on about Keir Starmer met privately with Taylor Swift afterwards. Lots of the other ticket holders didn't get to do that.
Because he's also the Prime Minister.
He's the Prime Minister. hey, wait till you find out he's got a free house in the middle of London as well. I mean, come on. I mean, it was our politics at the most juvenile and puerile and also disingenuous. Most of those journalists knew it was bollocks, but they were just doing it because, partly because they were bored. I mean, it was partly Downing Street's fault, and they've corrected this now, in fairness to them, but there was a period where they were basically announcing nothing, there was nothing in the grid, and journalists were bored. And you can't allow that to happen, because then it's a really good example, and I can understand why you're in government, you think this is tedious, because it's like we're trying to run a government, not a media entertainment service. But the problem is, if you don't entertain the lobby, if you don't entertain the pack, if you don't give them meat, then they'll just go hunting for you and for something else, and you can't control it. So it was a good example of losing control.
A lot has been made of the government's weakness in communications, a weakness in comms, like foregrounding. They've let the story get away from them a lot of times with various stories towards the end of the year. I suppose farmers, kind of waspy women, I guess. The previous scandal is a good example as well. Inheritance tax. What would your advice be to these people if you were hired as a consultant on media management?
Talk like normal people. Stop talking like robots. I mean, I'm not going to name any names, but I'm utterly bewildered by politicians who have gone into politics, which is a performative game. I mean, people might say that it shouldn't be, it hasn't always been. It's always been. It was all from ancient Greece. Politics has always, in all forms of, whether it's a democracy, an autocracy, whatever, and everything in between, there is an element of performance to politics. And I am amazed, and this would include people of all parties. It would include, Richie Sunak or Theresa May, maybe even Keir Starmer, but others as well. I'm amazed by the number of politicians who go into politics knowing that there's this strong performative element to it, who are terrible at it. I'm not including actually those two, because I actually think Sunak, Starmer and May did have some communication skills, but there are some, even ministers now, who they can't speak. They ask questions and they become an android. They start sort of. There was a minister who was on a programme not long ago who was being asked about the sort of government efficiency drive and being asked about civil servants, and they instantly kind of a sort of permagrin appeared on their face when they were asked about civil servants, and they said, "Well, I've had some fantastic experiences with my civil servants. They've been doing excellent work." Well, then started going into this sort of thing. And why not just turn around and go to the interview and just go, "Is everyone amazing where you work?" No, seriously, is everyone amazing where you work? No, or is everyone as good as they can be? No, they never are.
Do you have the perfect team here on the
No, and that's everywhere is like that, and that's what we're doing. We're just trying, and everyone watching this will understand it. Being able to tell those stories and just talking normally and not being afraid. What I'm amazed by, in a way, is that there's still so much of the kind of highly controlled approach to political communications in an era when we know that the most successful politicians are not especially controlled, that those who take risks, who do seem normal and authentic, even when they're not normal or authentic. And I'm surprised. I can understand why the kind of slightly drone-like sort of New Labour period, why it worked then. I don't think it works now. And so what I would say, honestly, if I were the Prime Minister or I was advising them, I would say I would be looking around my cabinet, and I would be thinking, or the cabinet, and I would be thinking, who are my best communicators? Never mind about government. I mean, government's really important, but you can have deputies to actually do a lot of that. Who are my best communicators? I ideally want people who can do both, but who are the people I can send out every day and sound normal and talk simply and can help me tell a story? That's what I'd be thinking about. And it's not an afterthought. I mean, I saw a government press release today, which I honestly thought I was like, whoever wrote this, they should be sacked. I mean, it was literally, it was so robotic and repeated itself. I'm not going to read it out because it'd be unfair, but it repeated itself, like within the same sort of 3 lines, and it made the minister, who already, frankly, sounds quite robotic, robotic would be too generous. I mean, they sounded almost sort of brain dead. I mean, I don't think this stuff is that hard, but I think in the age that we're in, it is not enough for the centre-left or centre-right. It is not enough just to be slightly worthy and progressive and dutiful and to sort of sound and to talk about delivery, because that is basically the government. I mean, that's the other theme of this year, isn't it? Is that Morgan McSweeney's belief and Keir Starmer's belief, I think. I mean, we heard it in his speech the other day. He said, what people want from their politics hasn't changed. Well, I think that's quite contestable, actually. And I also think that, they've put delivery at the heart of everything. If we deliver, then that will show to people that the system has worked, and they'll keep faith in the system. They'll re-elect us, and they won't turn to these extremes. Are you sure? I think the government could deliver everything it's promised, and could deliver quite well in the next 5 years. And that would all be a really tall order, by the way. But again, to go back to what we started with, if Musk gives 100 million and is dominating the online space, or 200 million, and the narrative is that they haven't, people will think that they haven't.
Yep.
Even if they see, they might. And then you might say to them, yeah, but what about those potholes that have been repaired? What about the hospital? They'll go, oh, yeah, that's true. But people can think two things at once. And the thing at the front of their mind rather than the back of their mind will be the overall narrative that they've failed. So you need to have a strategy and people who can communicate an alternative story. And I actually think, you know what, there's all this talk about what the government has been struggling and everything like that. Of course, struggling in some senses. Of course, government is a struggle. I think if you take the big sweep, they've not been doing badly. They've actually been, particularly towards the back end of the year, been quite active. They've got a lot of announcements. There's quite a lot of energy in particular areas. There's some exciting stuff, particularly on planning and all of this sort of stuff. What it lacks is a common story. It lacks a common thread. And I honestly think that the technocratic milestones and targets and all that, I don't think that cuts it anymore, because I just don't think it's... You have to activate people's emotions and their sense and vibes. I know it sounds facile and superficial, but it really, really matters.
Well, I hope the government's media advisor who's listening to this podcast has taken extensive notes there, and also apologies if it was you who wrote that press release.
Sorry.
Lewis Goodall, I think we'll leave it there. Thank you very much for coming in.
It has been an honour.
Thank you it's been an honour for me as well and the PoliticsJOE team.
And to do it with John Sopel's watchful eye, just staring at me throughout. It always puts me on my B game. So thank you.
Well, I hope you have a lovely new year. Looking forward to hearing more from newsagents
2025.
in 2025. Do you have anything else you'd like to plug?
Huh?
Would you like to plug anything else?
We've got our live shows coming up. Of course. We did our one at Royal Albert Hall, but we've got live show in Birmingham and Manchester and Edinburgh in February and March. So Excellent. If they go to Global Player, also search the newsagents live shows, they'll be able to find tickets for that.
Well, superb. Thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you.